So I just recently talked to a friend who's a friend of a friend. Okay. So her husband died, 50 years old, unexpectedly. And she was just going through the routine of there was no conversation. They didn't have a plan. They didn't have a will. She didn't know any of the passwords. She didn't pay the bills. I mean, it was just the most. I mean, you're devastated anyway, right? Because your spouse has died.
You lose your life partner.
Or you lose your life partner. But she had all this extra stress and worry and um, lack of knowledge of what to do next.
Yeah,
And it just made me stop in my tracks and think, I need to get busy and figure out what's next. And it's a hard conversation. Nobody likes to talk about dying
right.
and what happens next. It's an important conversation, though.
Huge, huge. And, I don't deal with a lot of the younger passings.
Mhm.
Occasionally, we might have a younger client pass, but, 30 years of retirement planning, most of my good friends that are passing are in their later 70s and in their 80s and even longer, right?
Mm.
There's conversations with those clients where it is very, very important to make sure we have all of our ducks in a row. But the young ones, I think it's easy for a lot of us to feel like, well, that's not going to happen to us. Right?
Right.
And statistically, it's not.
Right.
But for the one in 1,000 that does happen, and it's devastating. And you talk about so many of those things being locked out of computers because nobody has a password, or I can't find out about my credit cards or my banking because my husband did all of that and I don't have access to any of that.
Mhm.
I mean, it is really hard. And so those are tough conversations. And I think anybody, if you've started a family, then I think you really should start having some type of an estate plan. And it starts that early because once again, if you have underage children and something happened to both of you, what is that plan?
Mhm.
That's a hard conversation. And do you have friends or family
It
members?
always feels like it's a long ways off, and then until it's not.
It is, and that's just it, right? Because you don't know. You don't know who's going to have the unfortunate
Mm.
circumstance. And so I think having just getting planning started. And like I've said before, there are some awesome attorneys that are in Salt Lake Valley that, once again, we're more than happy to give people a list of attorneys that we work with that we're confident in. But majority of estate planning attorneys are going to do a good job. Um, but what you really have to start doing is thinking about the hard questions and the things that are maybe uncomfortable, right? So,
Like an executor? Like
well,
who's
who's
gonna
going to be your trustee?
okay.
And these are things, like I said, going to an attorney is great because he or she will help you lay this out. And but deciding who's going to administer your estate, who gets what. There's a lot of times where it's easy, right? Every beneficiary, if you have 4 kids, each of them get 25% and it just goes equal. That's one way. But then all of a sudden, you might not have just a traditional circumstance. You might have 2 kids that live in homes, they're independent, they've been very successful financially. And you might have a 3rd child who, life hasn't been quite so easy. Maybe they've gone through a divorce or, they've lost their home or a job or, you know, I have one client currently, this couple, the wife's mother has just passed, so we were doing their estate transference down to them, and that immediately started this conversation for the couple we were sitting with of, "Hey, um, one of our daughters does not have a home. Our other 2 kids do have one. Can you help us put together a plan that allows our daughter, who doesn't have a home, to inherit ours and still have a way that the other 2 siblings feel good about it?" And it's like, yeah, let's sit down and talk. Let's look at what other assets exist. And so we started strategizing on what really could be a really hard conversation with the 3 kids. And especially if 2 of the kids are not getting a part of the inheritance of a home and the other child is, you start thinking to yourself, okay, are you going to create animosity within the family? How does, but those conversations, if they're had out in the open and you're prepared, you're working with an attorney to make sure things are drafted the right way, that's when all of a sudden they might still be hard,
Mhm.
but at least you give it the forum to execute it and to have conversations.
and they know your wishes because you're still here. You're still here to have the
If you don't
conversation.
have that, then you only leave your kids guessing what you thought. And I can't even tell you the number of clients where I know the kids thought the parents thought something, and I have been lucky enough to sit up close and I know what the client's true feelings about their kids were, but the kids are basically interpreting it based off of what they got.
What's the biggest mistake you see?
Um, I think the biggest mistake is just not having a trust, and if you do have a trust, making sure that it's updated. You think about how much our family dynamics can change in 5 to 10 years. So you might be in your original trust, you're dealing with underage children. So then that has its own set of circumstance. Now all of a sudden 10 years later, they're all grown and out of the house. And then it's like, okay, which of my children are the ones that are close by that can help deal with immediate needs? Maybe some of your kids are more attentive to your health. Other kids are more savvy financially, right? There's all these dynamics
Yes.
that come into play. And so I think having a trust first and then having a commitment to having that trust reviewed about every 5 years. And it doesn't mean you have to redo a whole trust. You just go in and you might have to amend things and update them. And those are the things like, if anything, most people just don't do it.
Is it a good idea to talk to your heirs about these things before you go? So I know a lot of parents don't want their kids necessarily knowing what they're inheriting or what they're entitled to, or, they want them to make their own way. Is it an important conversation or?
In my opinion, I try not to step into telling my clients what to do,
Mhm.
but I have very open and honest conversations with my family to tell them how I see things going. Because, like I said, so much is only interpreted based off of the physical assets that are left behind. And if you can provide reasoning and context to why you did what you did, then your beneficiaries and primarily your children aren't guessing.
So it's the same plan as when you're living and planning for your future and having, that journey as for when you're gone. It's like the final step
Yeah.
of that journey.
Yeah. Like I said, I watch my clients that have good relationships with their kids, and most of them have been very honest throughout their lifetime with them. There are times where just relationships are fractured and things are uncomfortable. And I've watched literally people say, I'm not going to deal with that while I'm living, and they'll just have to deal with it when we get there.
'Cause they don't wanna have the
And they don't.
they don't wanna say who the executor is or
Yeah.
what have you.
And that can be really hard. And yet that's how some of them are
Mm.
handled.
So what would be the number one piece of advice? You've gotta get the estate
Yeah,
plan
I
first.
would absolutely, and once again, there's online programs that you can go and have those done. They're gonna end up being probably about half as much as what it would be to sit with an attorney. For most people, I would highly recommend to find an attorney and work with them. They'll make sure that all of the little nuances that are different for each person are addressed. Specifically, if you have any special needs um, relationships where special needs trusts and those types of things, because there's government programs that can be impacted if someone that's on a program inherits a large sum of money. It can literally blow up the incomes that they might be getting from a government program. So there's some complexities that way, but
Mhm.
I think people should just get with an attorney. That would be my advice
But
is,
it's part of your planning, right? I mean, they come to you for the plan, and this is part of that plan.
yeah, and if they have an attorney, we're more than happy to jump on. A lot of people already have started. A lot of them have let it get outdated. So we're going back to work with the attorney who drafted their original trust. It's part of what we address, but we don't provide legal services, but we will absolutely work with the attorneys.
But you do say, "Hey, in order to be solvent and financially responsible, you need to take this step."
Yes,
You will encourage people to do that.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, so has there been an experience where you saw something go south and you've used that as a tool for other people?
Yeah, I mean, what's fun like, a lot of them are just kinda unique, funny. I mean, we've never seen massive financial issues. Right now, I mean, the estate issues from a tax standpoint,
Mhm.
without any planning, you can avoid your first $12 million isn't subject to a state tax under the current law. So you don't see that. More than anything, you see, like I've said before, people misinterpreting how mom and dad felt about them based off of what they received. So I always relay this when I'm talking with clients. I did some estate planning for a couple. They were ranchers up in Star Valley, Wyoming. Cutest couple, love them. But they had this piano in their home, and when it came down to decide where different assets went, it came down, they wanted one of their daughters to get the piano. And so they went through the process, and I'm sitting in the room with them as the attorney's talking with them. They're like, well, this daughter, she has a piano, and this daughter's renting an apartment, so she has nowhere to put a piano. So let's give it to this daughter.
Mhm.
And that really was how the decision was made. Well, a couple years later, the client passed. We're at the church after the funeral. I was invited to go to the family lunch, and so I'm eating, and sure enough, dispute amongst the three daughters arises, and they kind of pulled it off into a little side room. But one of them came and said, "We need you to come and talk to us." And so I went in, and the two sisters that didn't inherit the piano were convinced that the other sister was mom's by far favorite, and the piano proved it.
Right. And you're like, "If you only knew."
And I tried, no matter what I said, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
That was what they walked away with, and I feel like stuff like that happens. People interpret what mom and dad feel based off of how the assets transfer. So the easiest and most simple thing is just say, "Hey, we'll split it equal amongst the kids," and that works a lot of the time. But there's circumstances and like the home
Mhm.
where, the parents are so concerned at the cost of housing in the Salt Lake Valley,
Yeah.
and they know that this daughter is never going to be able to qualify for a home. And so they want desperately for her to receive the home so she has the ability to raise her daughter in that home.
Right, which makes total sense, and it's the combination of being strategic and smart and financial, and then there's a lot of emotion involved
Right.
as well. So it's
And
like marrying those.
And that's why the attorneys, the good estate planning attorneys, they've seen it all, and they have a strategy to deal with them. And that's where, like I said, we love working with them. They usually circle back and they make sure that the investments and everything are titled correctly, which unbelievably, if you want to know the second thing that I think people should do, if they do have a trust, they really need to see if their trust has been funded. Have they really put the assets in the name of the trust the way the attorney has directed them? Because a lot of times you have a trust document, but the assets never make it into the trust.